Hello and welcome once again to Baked Beans Garage where, I don't know, I think they're neat. This bug probably looks pretty nice from there, but you'll see. Let's get into it. So if you've been following the channel, you know that my daily driver got totaled a little while ago. I'm fine, the cats are fine, don't worry. It was a lovely Jetta, a perfect commuter, but it was the bank's car. I wasn't all that attached, so I'm not tremendously upset. Now many moons ago, my daily driver was a sunflower yellow new Beetle. It was a diesel 5-speed, but then my back kinda exploded. Only 2 of the discs, but it made it quite difficult to drive a manual, so I had to sell it, and I have regretted it since then. After that, I got a TDI Sport Wagon, but it had a DSG, the dual clutch transmission, and I sold it as soon as that started to give me trouble. Rather, I traded it in on a TDI Touareg, not the fun V10 one, the later V6, and that was lovely, but then diesel became $6 a gallon, so I got tired of feeding it. So I ate the crow and rolled all of my negative equity into the Jetta, which I was pretty upside down on, but they made me get gap insurance, so it's all fine. Anyways, that debt has gone away and now I have a bug. Of course, I did try to track down my original Beetle, but that guy ain't selling it. Very wise. So in shopping for another TDI, I happened to find a 5-speed TDI Sunflower Yellow Beetle, an early one too. This has the almighty ALH, just like my first one. If you know, you know. This lovely specimen is a 2003 model with 142,000 miles and 0 warning lights on the dash. I got it from the original owner too, so it came with about 20 years of maintenance documentation. It even still has the original glove box manual with all the scheduled maintenance that was done at the dealership. And the biggest flex of them all, the original window sticker. Here we can see it's equipped with the Peak Luxury cold weather package, including heated leatherette seats and heated washer nozzles. Very nice. However, I can't help but feel like it does look a bit lonely, and I think it could use a friend. This is the other sunflower yellow TDI 5-speed Beetle that was for sale within 500 miles of me. Also an early ALH. But as you can probably tell with your eyeballs, this one's a lot worse. But it's not rusty, which is why I bought it. This has 334,000 miles and no maintenance history, assuming maintenance has been done. But it does have some nice new tires. This one, however, doesn't have any rust holes in it. And this one does, but I want to drive this one, and I have recently moved to a place where there are annual inspections. From my understanding, the requirements here are very similar to that of an MOT if you're in the UK. Now, if you've seen my channel before, you will know that by my standards, this doesn't have any rust. It is brand new. However, the inspectors don't much like holes in the bottom of the car, so I do need to fix those. We won't be messing with this one today, but it was more fun to have both in the intro. So upon peeling that there banana, I realized that it was a bit more rotten than I bargained for, and I think this is going to be the only video. As mentioned, it's now my daily driver, so I kind of just need it done. As much as I like making videos, it does slow me down a little bit. So a brief intermission while I cope and calm my nerves a little bit. I have a few cool bug facts for you. The original Beetle, the old Beetle, was built between 1938 and 2003 in Mexico. That, of course, being the Volkswagen Beetle, not the KDF wagon. We're not going into all that. We don't need to worry where the name came from. Anyways, that means that these 2 bugs were built while the old Beetle was still in production. I think that's pretty nifty. That's because even after 1976, when they introduced the Golf specifically to kill the Beetle, especially in Mexico, they just loved them, and they kept buying them, so they kept building them. Anyways, back to bug 1. As mentioned, I started peeling it and found a little more than I knew about. Now, I knew about the 7 holes in the floor and the 4 in the rockers, but I also found the exhaust bid pipe was pitted and cracked and leaking quite badly. All of the brake lines from the ABS module back were pitted and about to start leaking. They did start leaking when I took them apart. Both rear brakes were completely down to the metal. That probably explains that weird pedal feel. Both handbrake cables were worn through the sheathing and one was even snapped. Very cool. And both fuel tank straps were almost rotten through and about to let go. But there's no cost like sunk cost. In most realities, it's probably not worth putting all that work into that there car, but have you seen the channel before? If you haven't, Or if you have, subscribe either way. It's a good time right now. Anyways, I tore it all apart. I made some new brake lines from the ABS module back, got some new brake hoses, did all the rear brakes, got some new tank straps, redid the exhaust mid-pipe, don't worry where that cat went, and put some new handbrake cables in, and then did quite a bit of painting and sealing because it's still a rust belt rig. There's no getting around that. So as you can see, it is now back together, it is now inspected, and it is now a completely roadworthy automobile. So I can finally get to the things that I want to work on, not the things that I have to work on. I already did two things that I didn't have to do. Of course, the headlights were all cloudy and foggy, so I gave those a polish. Can't be seen driving around like that. Also, the wheels that are now on this bug were on that bug. The rears were almost bald, so just for the inspection, I threw the Steelies with the nice fresh tires from this one on that one, but not before making them pretty again. I think this is the first time I have used Tire Shine in ever. Anyways, on to the fun stuff. Beginning in here, next to our beautiful OEM flower vase, you'll see a beautiful OEM premium monsoon stereo. Now this works quite perfectly, but if you're familiar with these cars, you'll know they have quite the Achilles heel. If you ever take it out of the car and it stops communicating with whatever pixies down in the dash, it'll lock you out, and you need a code to get back in. That code only ever came with the car from the dealership, which is what ends up killing a lot of these. There might be another way to get into it, but since this was a one-owner car, read this and weep. Beautiful. So of course, since I'm a nerd, that does give me the fizz. However, I do want something a little more practical. Since I am an iPad kid with no sense of direction, I do want something with a screen. And while it does feel completely wrong to take out this lovely German OEM piece and put in some cheap Chinese hunk of plastic, I want a screen because I don't know where I'm going otherwise. But because these are so expensive and rare, you need these two little keys, what to pull it out. Excuse me? Can you don't, please? Now obviously that leaves us with a very not standard singled-in hole, so there is a kit you can get what to fill that and make it a standard singled-in. So that is what I have done to accommodate this rather cheap Android Auto head unit. It was the only one that I could find that fit my criteria. That is a screen and a knob for the volume. But I went with that one because this dash kind of slopes backward and the screen kind of comes straight up from the bottom of it, so I think it'll sit in there quite nicely. So here that is mounted into the plate for the new Beetle. It captures these two screws right behind the head unit. And that same kit comes with a pigtail to plug into the car. The other end is just what came with the stereo. Now I did notice that those are the same flavor of connector. However, the constant 12 volt and the switched 12 volt pins are swapped for some reason. So just plugging those into the stereo didn't work. Well, that kind of worked, but then the stereo won't have any memory. And this also keeps me from having to mess with the OEM wires. And that guy can just hang out. We don't need that anymore. Not that I'll ever use the radio, but that came with it. I don't know what the red wire is for, so I have decided to ignore it. The only thing I had to do invasively was add a little bit of clearance here at the edge for the two screws that actually mount it to the thingy. Also, the only wire I did not connect was for the reverse circuit, because small fishbowl does not need a backup camera. Hey, that looks like it's going to work exactly like it did in my head. That never happens. And these two little fellas will make it look almost OEM, not really. So long as it works, I'm pretty happy with that. Wow, it's already connecting to my phone specifically. That's crazy. Wonder how it knew to do that. And I did connect the illumination circuit, so it should dim when I put the headlights on. Nice. Huh? That's an interesting feature. I'm to assume this is not made for an analog dimmer switch, So when it doesn't see that full 12 volts to tell it to dim, I guess it just gets confused and does that. I like the dimmer all the way up anyways, that seems to make it stay dark. Lovely, moving on. And we'll come back to all the soft touch plastics later. Those can be fixed by just scrubbing the coating off with some isopropyl alcohol, but that is quite tedious and I don't want to do it right now. So next is the headliner. Since the new Beetle is still a Mark IV at heart, I don't need to explain what has happened here. But of course we have my favorite complication, a sunroof. Luckily this one has the advantage of being 20 years old instead of the 40 that I'm used to. But that does mean we have to contend with this rear view mirror. Now one thing I don't like about new Beetles is the stupid dome light situation. We got those two back there and then one in the mirror. And supposedly this kind of just pops off. Okay, I believe you now. Oh yeah, just some little pegs, nifty. Here you'll also see that we have no ambient temperature indication. That's because I know the sensor's missing. We'll get to that. But before I go unplugging stuff, I will disconnect the battery to avoid making it angry. And although an angry bug is difficult to imagine, believe you me, it can happen. Good thing we have this picnic table of a dashboard up here to store items. Very convenient. This aftermarket duct tape, OEM is much stickier. And now all that should be holding it up is this lip, what is clamped over the sunroof frame right here. But taking that out also makes it super easy to get to the shuttle. But that is a job for later. Oh, for the dome lights, all of the wiring is affixed to the headliner and it just unplugs all from one place. Very nice. And the hatch is the biggest hole in the car, so logic would dictate it'll come out this way. Wow. And with the dome lights popped out, we can finish peeling this. Oh, they used glue that actually works on the inside of the sunroof opening. Very annoying. And as you can see, it's actually this foam layer that lets go and not the glue itself. So the rest of that foam has to go away or else it's just going to fall down again. And for this, a brush on a drill does a very good job at relocating all of the foam from the headliner to literally every conceivable surface in your environment. So get ready to clean up a mess, but it do work good. And with it all cleaned up, it is time for some new fabric. This pattern will not be a surprise if you're a returning viewer. This is just some off-the-shelf fleece. Now all these corners and crevices stand to be a challenge. This headliner shell is a bit curvier than most. But that's why I like to use fleece. It is very stretchy and easy to work in to all those shapes. And the glue I like to use is this 3M Super 90, the stuff that comes out all stringy and gross looking. Folding it like that will protect the front half from overspray. And once that gets tacky, we can stick it together. And with any luck, this will happen without sticking to itself. but I know better than to be optimistic. And an important consideration for this front end, with all the curves in it, if it ever starts to sag, it's going to be in one of these valleys here. So for a little extra stiction, I like to use this E6000, which is a real thick and goopy construction adhesive, and it has not let me down yet. So that went pretty well. There's something marginally cleaner to set it on. Now to make this shape work, we'll need to make some relief cuts. 2 is usually enough at each corner. Hopefully I don't end up learning something. And I will go around this whole edge with the glue, but you need the tackiness of the spray glue to stretch it around there to begin with. Now for the little holes, especially if you're using fleece, do not try to drill that or cut it. You'll just make a mess. It is way more effective to melt the hole. A soldering iron with a yucky old tip works, but I found the torch first. And looking at the visors, I know we need 2 holes, so I'll just eyeball that. I said visors, these are for the grab handles. But you already knew, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And with that looking rather dandy, we can repeat all of the same stuff on the shuttle. Well, I didn't do the best job of getting the pattern straight, but I'm out of glue, so it's going back in. Now, I don't know the ideal number of pairs of hands for getting a headliner in, but I am certain that it's not 1. Luckily, this one is small. Well, that wasn't too bad, in my experience. Oh, for fu- And aside from the duct tape residue on some of the rear plastics, that all went pretty smoothly. Also, I got all that done in one day, so I'm quite proud of myself. Now, however, I must interrupt my own program with more of me talking. I may have lied a bit at the beginning when I said the car is mechanically sound. I have now had to drive it a little bit more, and that's not quite the case. Now, I have known since I bought it that the brake pedal is a bit stiff. Now, a very common problem on these is that the line with the check valve in it between the vacuum pump and the brake booster will crack at the fittings. So I assumed that's what I was going to be dealing with, a very easy fix. But no, of course. It wasn't cracked. I changed it anyway. It didn't solve anything. So I thought, it must be a weak vacuum pump. So now that one's missing a vacuum pump and these brakes still don't work right. And at this point, I think I have snorted enough copium to admit that I'm gonna have to do the thing I really didn't want to do. And looking at the new one, we can see it's only actually 6 bolts, so in concept, it's a fairly simple job. However, it is buried behind literally everything else in the engine bay, so this is gonna be miserable. Also worth mentioning, cars don't have to use vacuum to boost the brakes. You'll see some bigger diesels that actually use power steering pressure to boost the brakes. That's called Hydro Boost, or at least that's what GM called it in the 70s and 80s. And there we can see the 2 lines coming out of the master cylinder that slide right over to the ABS module. There's some electronics and valves in there what keep your wheels from locking up, I guess. And what I seem to have forgotten is that the master cylinder reservoir also feeds the clutch master cylinder. So there's an extra tube in there I forgot about. And to finish finding out what's going to be in the way, I have to free it from the inside, the fun part. And in here we'll find that there are many things in the way. How refreshing. Pretty sure I didn't have to take those 3 out. Oh hey, the clips I broke off the dimmer switch. Those will be helpful. Back there we can see it's just 4 nuts through the firewall with a fix-it. And the internet told me that taking off this bracket between the brake and the clutch pedal makes this easier, but I'm not gonna do that. And the only real headache is the clip that affixes the push rod into the back of the pedal. Now you can finagle it with 2 screwdrivers if you're super limber, but I didn't want to deal with it, so I bought the tool. So unsubscribe if you must. Never mind, that's why the internet said to take that bracket out. I may not be very smart. Don't know how I could possibly get a camera and my face in there, but it does something like that. And it comes out. Oh, and now the brake lights are on forever. Now it's just a matter of getting some other stuff out of the way to extract this flying saucer of misery. The only things that seem to be in the way are this here fan controller and then the ABS module. I think if I just dismount them and scooch them forward, that will be enough room. I don't know why we need 3 coolant temp sensors. Actually, I'm pretty sure I do. Just guessing that one is for the glow plug controller, one is for the dash lights, and one is for the ECU. It is one of my very few gripes with Lebuggo that you don't get an actual coolant temp gauge, just a red and a blue coolant light. Oh, the brake lights have been on since I said out loud that the brake lights were on. Oh. Lovely. And before the new one goes in, I just got to measure how far that rod is sticking out. and make sure it is the same. About 1/4 of a millimeter less. Can also do some measurements and some calipers in party mode. Can also do some measurements and some maths to make sure that you won't be actuating the piston in here at the resting position, then your brakes will drag. I believe I explained that a little better in a previous video. I don't feel like doing it again. And with that, reassembly is just reverse of disassembly, so I suppose we're about done. But of course, if you've ever worked on anything ever, you know that's never true. Did you notice me leave all the nuts on the studs before I put it in? Apparently I didn't. And one thing that does complicate a few jobs on a Beetle versus a Jetta or Golf is the plastic scuttle panels up at the top. Those do come off so you can get to the turbo and the intake better, but I'm glad I didn't have to do that today. Lovely. But I appear to have missed with the push rod. It's on the outside of the pedal. But with that now in the right postal code, it should just snap back into the pedal. Should. Lovely. Much to the relief of my spine, we should be done in here now. And since there's no evidence of the master cylinder leaking out of the back, it can just go back in, of course with a new seal back there. And since it's a common problem, one of these tubes is easy to find new. And I don't think I will have introduced much, if any, air to the brakes. And I especially hope I didn't anger the ABS module. But of course, I gotta bleed them anyway since I opened it. But that should be a job done. Well, the pedal no longer feels like it's connected to a stack of bricks. I'd almost say it feels normal. I'd like to say it's been a success, but I know to hold my tongue just yet. And one thing I hadn't mentioned is that they were definitely dragging, at least in the rear, ever so slightly. You may have noticed the wear pattern on the rotors didn't look entirely healthy. The first few times I drove it, I could definitely smell them. At least they're broken in now. Let us try a spirited stop. Ooh! ABS even appears to work, that's nice. Anyways, I'm pretty confident in letting my tongue go now. That appears to have fixed it. Lovely. A feature of the new place I hadn't mentioned yet that I quite like. At the old place, I lived directly off a 2-lane highway, which made test drives in vehicles of questionable safety a little perilous, which is why I never did it. But here I have lots of these unmarked single-lane back roads, so hopefully I'll be able to do more of that. Well, not really hopefully, I know I'll be able to do more of that. Lots of twists and turns too that I like quite a lot. We'll put these 15-inch pizza cutters through their paces. And with that having been an unmitigated success, it finally drives just perfectly. I'm quite a fan of how these things drive. Although it's a little bit weightier than you might expect for a car that looks like this, it's still just a Mark IV Jetta, which is quite the nice platform. But anyway, with the stupid drivability safety details finally out of the way, I can get back to the cosmetic stuff, starting with this door handle. Now we can see a bit of a rust blister has started. Most of the paint is still there, but that's actually making it worse. Of course, that paint is just going to hold more moisture against the surface of the metal and make it corrode even further. But in my travels, I did find a rattle can that very closely matches the one of 7 colors that sunflower yellow becomes after about 20 years. And due to the aforementioned fading, I would like to paint this whole thing eventually, but that's not going to be anytime soon. I think that little fix makes it a solid 20-footer. The rust ain't going to spread. Moving aftways, my center brake light is falling out. Now, since it's the early 2000s, we were starting to see LEDs on the outside of cars, so this and the side repeater lights are both LED. One thing I don't like is in 2002, they got rid of the flippy-uppy badge with the handle right here, so the only way to get in is with the key fob. But once you're in, it's a rather easy job. Can you go in there, please? What do you mean an aftermarket part doesn't fit perfectly? Never in my life. The way the little tangs are shaped on the bottom just makes it impossible to install. And right around the seam here, you'll see that very ugly looking plastic welding. That's creating a little flange that also makes it not fit. Very cool. Anyways, that was very aggravating. It's put in with RTV instead of that gasket. None of the clips work and the screws don't really line up, but it works, so I don't really care. And while I'm back here, I'll continue complaining about this badge. Earlier ones, we would have had that thing flip up and there'd be a handle for the hatchback here. In 2002, we lost that and the 3D molded badge. And instead we have these front and rear that just get all sun bleached and look like doo-doo. And I haven't found a nice set in a salvage yard yet, so I'm just going to polish these up and see how they look. Oh. I don't know, I kind of like the ghosty look. Not like you really need reminded it's a Volkswagen. And with those looking marginally better, back to the front, I have decided the headlights aren't quite up to my standards. Polishing them gets rid of the yellow, but you can still see some of that texture and the crazing in there, plus the drop of brake fluid I kind of spilled on it. Glossing over that, they just need a bit of a wet sand. Of course, the right way to do this is to clear coat them to protect them from the UVs going forward, but I don't really have any good clear coat to use right now. This will at least make them flat and shiny. And comparing it to the other one, which was just polished and not wet sand, that's quite the improvement. And while we're up here, I'm not really a fan of how dingy the scuttle looks, so let's fix that. And with the scuttle looking a whole lot less dusty, that's all the big noticeable stuff I wanted to get done. So now I guess we're down to the details. Until this point, I have had no ambient air temperature indication. Super common on the Mark IV for the sensor to just fall out because it's up behind the bumper. And that's what had happened, so after some haphazard wiring and some zip ties, that's working again. I also did start scrubbing off some of that interior soft touch plastic coating. You just need some isopropyl alcohol and some elbow grease, but that is very tedious and annoying, so I only did some of it. That'll happen in time. And the key fobs, although both present, the buttons look kind of gross and the keyring eyelet on both is broken. But this is another super common Mark IV problem, so you can find a new lower case pretty easily. So just act like you're changing the battery, but put some new pieces on. Nice. And just for the sake of virtue signaling, I don't only work on big fun projects, I also do maintenance sometimes. Suppose I'll change the oil. Briefly, before I conclude, it is now the future. As I mentioned, I don't like these, but I have since been to a salvage yard and I found the nice ones from a 2010 bug, and I wanted to include this, so I will. But I'd like to be as non-destructive as possible, especially with my paint. Don't mind this large patch of missing clear coat. I still don't want to mess up my paint. So from what I'm learning here, in 2003, they spent all the money on the glue and cheaped out on the badge. That did hit me in the face. Let's hope the ichrometer got it level enough. And that is a tremendous improvement. Okay, back to the present. And with that, I am left with a rather lovely looking, mechanically sound, sensible daily that ought to go another 800,000 miles quite easily. And this time I own it, not the bank. That's a nice plus. As far as plans for the future, I don't really have any. I'm just gonna drive it. It's probably not gonna break until I said that, but it is a Mark IV TDI, so it's probably not gonna break. But with this out of the way, I can finally shift focus back to the wagon, finally get it back on the road and off to its new home. This bug, I didn't really mess with at all. It's quite broken, it needs a lot, but we'll see that in an upcoming video. Anyways, if you're still here, I do appreciate you watching, of course. And a gentle reminder, I do have a shirt you can buy now. There's a link in the description. But while you scroll down that way, maybe hit the subscribe button while you're there. Hit the notification bell, perhaps leave a comment. I would appreciate it. There is also Patreon if you want some random sporadic behind the beans content. Thank you to my current patrons. I love you. But finally, as always, I do thank you for watching. I am a chinchilla with a bug infestation, and this has been Baked Beans Garage. I will see you next time. Oh, the camera's in the wrong bug. How will I ever hit 1 billion subscribers if I can't even do my own outro gag?